Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time, we're tackling a pretty fascinating topic. Leviticus chapter 8, the installation of Aaron and his sons as priests.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Lots to unpack there.
Right.
We're using this online Bible study from My Christian Space, and it's cool because they really break it down verse by verse.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of not just what happened, but like what it all means.
Yeah.
The symbolism and all that.
Absolutely. The symbolism is key here. What's so striking about this chapter is it's like God gave Moses a detailed blueprint. Not just, hey, there's going to be priests,
Right.
It's every item, every action, the order it all happens in. It's all laid out. And that emphasizes how important ritual and order are in worship.
It's almost like baking a cake,
Exactly.
You can't just throw the ingredients together. There's like a method to the madness. And it makes you think about areas of life where we rely on process, right? Like your job or maybe a hobby you're really into, or even relationships. But God's being super specific here. It's like he's setting a precedent. Like, this is how we do things.
Yeah, and that attention to detail, it's evident right from the start, before the ceremony even begins. Aaron and his sons, they had to be washed with water.
It's like a spiritual bath, a reset button before stepping into this new role. I've always been fascinated by moments in life that mark a big change. Graduating, getting married, or even that time I, completely overhauled my diet.
Oh, wow.
Those symbolic actions, they really stick with you.
Absolutely. And this washing, it's symbolic of baptism, right?
Uh-huh.
Transitioning to this new state of being under God's authority.
Okay, but then things get really interesting when we get to the clothes. Aaron's high priest outfit, tunic, sash, robe. Then there's this elaborate vest, a decorated belt. It's a whole look.
It's like the ultimate uniform, right? Just like we use uniforms today to convey authority and status. You see a police officer's badge, instantly commands respect. Doctor's white coat signifies expertise. These priestly garments were doing the same thing. They were communicating the sacredness and importance of their role.
And there's a hierarchy even in the clothing, right?
Yes.
Like the tunic, sash, and robe that's baseline for all priests.
Right.
But then Aaron gets these extra pieces, the vest and the belt, really sets him apart as the high priest.
Yeah. It's a visual reminder of his unique authority.
It is. And, this hierarchy within the priesthood, it begs a question, how is God intending for spiritual leadership to work? What can we learn from the structure,
That is a great question, and one we'll keep coming back to, I think, as we go.
Good point. But you know what really caught my eye? The Urim and Thummim.
Oh, yes.
Those mysterious objects tucked into the breastplate?
Yeah.
What were they all about?
Well, the Urim and Thummim, they're a bit of an enigma. The traditional rabbinic view is that they were used to discern God's will, particularly for, settling disputes or making big decisions.
Whoa. So like a direct line to divine guidance. Can you imagine? I mean, it makes you wonder, how would you even handle that kind of responsibility?
Right.
Would it make your choices easier or just more complicated knowing the outcome? You know what I mean?
It's a fascinating concept, isn't it? And this whole theme of divine purpose, it's woven even deeper into the ceremony with the anointing. Both the tabernacle and Aaron, they're anointed with special oil.
Right. It's like they're both being set apart, made sacred for God's use.
Exactly. This anointing signifies consecration. The tabernacle becomes a holy space, and Aaron becomes a vessel for God's purposes, like dedicating something to a higher calling.
Yeah, we still use that word today, consecrate, even outside of religious context. We consecrate land for a memorial or, a building becomes a museum. It's giving something special significance, setting it apart. And in Aaron's case, it's about serving as that link between God and the people.
But hold on, Aaron's sons are also dressed as priests, right?
Yes.
But their outfits are simpler. They don't get the fancy oil treatment. That's true. You're right. There's a clear hierarchy here. Aaron, as the high priest, he gets this special level of consecration.
Right.
It emphasizes his unique role in discerning and teaching God's will. His sons, while still priests, they're under his authority.
Okay, so it's not just about the clothes. It's about this structure of leadership, the different levels of responsibility, which makes me think, why is that hierarchy so important? Is it about maintaining order, making sure things run smoothly, or is it something deeper about how authority is supposed to function within a spiritual context,
That's a great question, and we'll keep unpacking, I think, as we go. But now, let's delve into the sacrifices, shall we? We see a bull being sacrificed as a sin offering, And Aaron and his sons, they're laying their hands on his head.
Yeah, it's a powerful visual, right? Like they're transferring something onto the bull. What's the message behind that?
It symbolizes the transfer of sin and the need for atonement, even for the priests themselves. It's this stark reminder that none of us are perfect. We all fall short, and we need forgiveness.
It's humbling, isn't it? No matter how, quote-unquote, high up you are, that need for redemption is universal.
Exactly. And then we see this ram, sacrificed as a burnt offering, again with the laying on of hands.
Okay, so two different sacrifices, both with this hand-laying thing. What's different about the purpose here?
Well, the burnt offering, it signifies a desire for access to God and acknowledging his judgment on sin. It's like saying, we recognize our imperfections and we want to be in right relationship with you, an act of humility and submission.
It makes you think about the sacrifices we make in our own lives, right?
Yeah.
To be closer to God. Maybe it's letting go of pride, confessing our mistakes, making amends. They might not be as dramatic as a burnt offering, but those internal sacrifices are still steps towards spiritual growth.
Well, hold on. There's another ram mentioned, the ram of consecration.
Yes, the ram of consecration.
What's going on with that one?
Well, the rituals surrounding the consecration ram, those are particularly interesting. Some of its blood is applied to the priest's ears, their thumbs, and their big toes. Now that's specific. What's the symbolism behind those body parts?
Well, that's where things get a bit mysterious. The text doesn't explicitly explain it, but it invites interpretation. Some scholars suggest it symbolizes dedicating all of one's actions, hearing, doing, and walking, to God's service. Ears attuned to his word, hands skilled for his work, feet walking his path. It's pretty powerful imagery.
It adds a whole other layer to this idea of being consecrated, doesn't it? It's not just a state of mind, it's about every action being aligned with God's will. But then there's this wave offering with bread and parts of the ram being lifted up. It's not all blood and sacrifice. There's food involved too. What's that about?
The wave offering, that's traditionally associated with victory and alignment with God's will. It's this gesture of celebration and thanksgiving, recognizing God's power and blessings.
Oh, so like a cosmic high five.
Exactly.
Acknowledging that all we have comes from him.
Exactly. And then we have this detail that always jumps out at me. Moshe takes the breast of the ram for himself.
Oh, is that like a reward for officiating the ceremony, like a well-done prize?
Well, it's more than just a reward. The breast, often associated with strength and sustenance, could symbolize Moshe's role as leader and provider of the people.
Oh, okay.
Remember, he's the one who received God's law and guided them through the wilderness. So it's acknowledging his vital role, which parallels the priesthood in some ways.
So it's not just about Aaron's investiture. It's about how all these roles, the prophet, the priest, the people, are interconnected in God's plan.
Yes.
That's cool. But one image that really stuck with me is Moshe sprinkling Aaron and his sons with both the anointing oil and the blood from the altar.
Yeah, that's the culmination of it all, right?
Yes. But what's the meaning of combining the oil and blood like that?
It's this beautiful fusion of symbolism, right?
Yeah.
The oil, as we discussed, represents consecration, being set apart for God. The blood points to atonement, the sacrifice for sin. So by combining those two elements, it really highlights the dual nature of the priesthood.
Dual nature. Tell me more.
So, on the one hand, priests are called to be holy, set apart, dedicated to God, right? That's the oil. But they're also human, flawed, in need of atonement, just like everyone else. That's where the blood comes in. It's a reminder that even those chosen for these, sacred duties still need God's grace and forgiveness. It's a message of humility.
It's like saying, you're special, you've got this important role, but don't get a big head. You're still going to mess up. You'll need God's help.
Precisely. And then we see them share a meal together, sealing the covenant between them and God.
Right. It's not just dinner, it's communion. And burning any leftovers emphasizes that it's not an ordinary meal, it's sacred. Which makes you think about how we approach meals, especially those with loved ones. Are we present? Are we grateful? Are we recognizing the sacredness of that connection?
Such a good point. And speaking of reflection, let's revisit the last stage of the ceremony, those 7 days of waiting. It's not just about patience, but recognizing that real spiritual growth, it takes time.
7 days is a long time to just hang out outside the tabernacle. What do you think was going on in their heads during that?
Well, they've just been through this intense ceremony, right? Decked out in these robes, anointed with oil and blood. It's a lot to process.
Information overload.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe it's about integrating everything they've experienced, reflecting on their new roles, the weighty responsibilities coming their way, like a period of incubation before they fully step into their calling, you know?
Like that feeling when you start a new job, you're excited, but also a little overwhelmed. Maybe that's what Aaron and his sons were going through. So we've uncovered a lot so far. The
Yeah.
symbolism, the rituals, this whole idea of spiritual leadership and sacrifice.
And it's all about establishing the priesthood, this lineage of spiritual leaders to guide the Israelites. It's laying the groundwork for their relationship with God.
Like setting the stage for generations to come. But how does all this ancient stuff relate to U.S. today? Stay tuned for part 2, where we bridge the gap between then and now. Welcome back. We're still deep in Leviticus chapter 8, exploring all the ins and outs of Aaron's investiture as high priest. Last time we were talking about those 7 days of waiting. What a way to wrap up a ceremony. What do you think the point of that was? Like just to let everything sink in?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it, right? Imagine going through such a powerful symbolic experience. You'd need some time to just process it all, let it all absorb. But I also think it emphasizes that spiritual authority, it's not just something you're given, it's earned through dedication and obedience. It's almost like an apprenticeship, you might say.
Spiritual boot camp.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's go back to those sacrifices for a minute. We talked about the sin offering and the burnt offering, both about transferring sin, seeking atonement. But then that third one, the consecration ram, things got really specific with that one, didn't they?
Oh, they did. Remember the blood being applied to the priest's ears, thumbs, and big toes? We were talking about dedicating all your actions to God. But let's dig a little deeper there.
Yes, let's unpack that a bit.
So think about what those body parts represent. Hearing, doing, and walking. What if it's about aligning those actions with God's will? Ears attuned to his word, the thumbs representing skilled work and service, big toes symbolizing the path of faith.
It's like saying, it's not just what you hear, it's what you do, where you go, it all matters. And it really makes you think about how we're aligning our own actions with God's will, in our everyday lives.
Absolutely. But there's more. We've got that wave offering, lifting the bread and parts of that ram up before God. I always picture this with a triumphant soundtrack, like a victory dance.
Oh, me too. But what's the deeper meaning there? It's not just about winning, right?
Right. The wave offering, it's about acknowledging God's sovereignty,
Yeah.
and expressing gratitude for his blessings. It's like saying everything good comes from you and we're offering it back in thanks.
It's a beautiful concept, recognizing that our talents, our resources, our very lives, they're all gifts. And it challenges us to use those gifts to honor God and serve others.
Exactly. Now, there's one little detail that always kind of jumps out at me. Moshe takes the breast of the ram for his portion. It almost feels like a well-done prize for leading the ceremony.
I thought that too, but I'm guessing there's more to it than that. What's the significance of that particular piece,
It's not just a reward. The breast, often associated with strength and sustenance, could symbolize Moshe's role as the leader and provider for the people. Remember, he's the one who received God's law and guided them through the wilderness.
Yeah.
So it's kind of acknowledging his very important role, which parallels the priesthood in a way.
So it's highlighting that interconnectedness again. Prophet, priest, people all working together. We talked before about that powerful image of Moshe sprinkling Aaron and his sons with both the anointing oil and the blood. Why combine the two?
It's a really profound blend of symbolism there.
Right.
Oil represents consecration, being set apart, but blood points to atonement, that sacrifice for sin. And when you combine them, it really highlights that dual nature of the priesthood.
Dual nature. What do you mean by that?
So priests are called to be holy, set apart for God. That's the oil, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're also human. They're flawed, in need of atonement, just like everyone else. That's where the blood comes in. It's a reminder that even those who are chosen for, sacred roles, they still need God's grace.
So it's like saying, yes, you're special, but don't let it go to your head. You're going to mess up. You'll need God's help.
Exactly. And that message of humility, it's reinforced even in that shared meal that follows. It's not just dinner, it's communion with God. It's sealing that covenant between them.
Mm-hmm.
And that instruction to burn any leftovers, that really emphasizes that this is no ordinary meal. It's sacred.
Yeah, it really does. Which makes you think about how often do we bring that level of intentionality to the meals in our own lives? Do we really appreciate the blessings, the connection, the sacredness of that moment?
It really is something to think about. And speaking of things to reflect on, let's circle back to those 7 days of waiting one more time. It's about humility, submission, recognizing that spiritual growth, it takes time. But I think there might be another layer to it, too.
Oh, I love a good extra layer. Tell me more.
Well, put yourself in their shoes for a second. Okay?
Yeah.
They've just gone through this elaborate ceremony. They're wearing those magnificent garments. They've been anointed, sprinkled with blood. It's sensory overload.
It's like drinking from a fire hose of symbolism.
Right. So maybe this waiting period is also about integrating all of that, reflecting on the profound meaning of their new roles, preparing themselves for all that responsibility that's coming their way.
It's like when you start a new job, You're excited, but also a little overwhelmed, and you kind of need some time to adjust, figure out the ropes, find your footing.
Exactly. Maybe we all need more waiting periods in our lives, those intentional pauses for reflection and spiritual renewal.
Mm-hmm.
But let's zoom out for a second. Let's look at the big picture here. This ceremony, it's not just about Aaron and his sons, right?
Right. It's about establishing the priesthood as a whole, this whole system of worship, of religious leadership. It's all being set in motion.
Precisely. It's laying the foundation for the Israelites' relationship with God, for generations to come. And by understanding the symbolism and significance of this ancient ceremony, we can glean so many valuable insights into the nature of spiritual leadership, the importance of ritual and tradition, and that timeless human longing for connection with the divine.
So we've really unpacked a lot about these rituals, the symbolism, the deeper meaning. But the big question remains, how does any of this connect to U.S. living in the 21st century? Well, we'll explore that in part 3, where we bridge the gap between the past and the present. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been immersed in Leviticus chapter 8, exploring every nook and cranny of Aaron's investiture as high priest, the rituals, the symbolism, all the deeper meanings. It's been a fascinating journey back in time, right? But now for that million-dollar question. How does this ancient ceremony relate to U.S. today in the 21st century? What can we actually take away from all of this?
That's the bridge we need to build, isn't it? From ancient ritual to modern relevance. And I think a key is to remember that even though we might not have those exact same robes or, animal sacrifices today, the principles behind them, they still hold true.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are those core principles and how do they actually translate to our lives now?
Well, let's start with consecration. Aaron and his sons, they were set apart for a holy purpose. They were dedicated to serving God and the people. And similarly, we're called to a life of service too, right? We're supposed to use our gifts and talents to make a positive impact on the world.
So it's not about becoming like literal priests, but adopting that priestly mindset, approaching life with a sense of purpose, being dedicated to something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. It's recognizing that our lives aren't just our own. We're called to be stewards of God's grace, channels of his love and compassion in the world. It's a way of living, not just a title.
Yeah, and that ties into the idea of sacrifice too, right? Aaron and his sons, they offered sacrifices to acknowledge their imperfections and seek atonement. Okay, so we don't have animal sacrifices anymore, but what are the sacrifices that we're called to make in our modern lives?
I think it's about surrendering our egos, letting go of those selfish desires, putting the needs of others before our own. It's about choosing forgiveness over holding grudges, showing compassion instead of judging, choosing love over fear.
Those are tough choices, for sure. But they're the kind of sacrifices that really change us, both individually and as a community.
Absolutely. And those sacrifices, they often involve waiting, right?
Right.
Those times of uncertainty and discomfort when we're trusting God to work in our lives.
Yeah.
Remember those 7 days that Aaron and his sons had to wait?
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just about patience. It was also about recognizing that spiritual growth takes time. Transformation, it doesn't happen overnight.
It's like when you're praying for something, you're hoping for a breakthrough, and it feels like nothing's happening,
Yeah.
And you're so tempted to just give up. But maybe those are the times that we need to lean in, trust God's timing, and really let ourselves be shaped by that whole process. It's about embracing the journey, even when it's tough.
You got it.
Yeah.
Trusting that God is working things out even when we can't see it. And speaking of journeys, we can't forget about the importance of symbols and rituals, right? We talked about how the priestly garments, the anointing oil, the sacrifices, they were all visual reminders of their roles and responsibilities. Even today, symbols and rituals, they have such a powerful effect on how we understand the world and our place in it.
You're right. Think about weddings, graduations, even just lighting a candle to remember someone, These are all symbolic acts, but they carry so much meaning. They connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely. And it's not just about traditional religious rituals. We create our own personal rituals too,
Yeah.
right? Maybe it's a morning meditation or a walk in nature, a weekly family dinner. Those rituals, no matter how simple they are, they help us center ourselves, connect with our values, and find meaning in our everyday lives.
So if we were to design a modern-day investiture ceremony, not for a priest, but for someone stepping into a significant role in their life, what would we even include? What symbols or rituals would capture that sense of transition, of commitment?
That's a great question for all of us to reflect on. What values and commitments are most important to you? How can you actually express those through meaningful actions and symbols? It's a challenge to be creative, to
Yeah.
personalize those moments of dedication.
It's like a call to create our own rituals of consecration, right? Those intentional moments that mark those big transitions remind us of the importance of our calling, whatever that calling may be.
Exactly. And ultimately, that's the tanless message of Leviticus chapter 8. It's not just some historical account. It's a reminder of our human desire for meaning, for purpose, for connection with God. And yeah, the outward forms might change, but those principles, consecration, sacrifice, service, those remain timeless guides on our own spiritual journeys.
It's been a fascinating deep dive, that's for sure. As we wrap up here, I want to leave you with a couple of things to think about. Where do you feel called to serve? What sacrifices are you willing to make to really live a life of purpose? And how can you create those rituals, those moments that remind you of your commitment to something bigger than yourself?
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep seeking. The journey of faith is an adventure, and there's always more to discover.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep that conversation going.